Let's now implement the save new message method of the thread service. So what we're going to do is, we have here all the data needed to be sent to the backend. So we are going to directly call the HTTP Angular service and we are going to trigger an HTTP post. Now what URL are we going to hit? We are going to hit /API as always, and we are going to hit threads. In here we are going to say which thread ID do we want to post some new data to. So we are going to use here the string interpolation syntax and we are going to pass in here the thread ID, which is available in the payload. Now we need to pass in some data to the HTTP post. We need to pass in the data that we want to send over the wire. Now let's see what data do we need to send. So we don't need to send the thread ID because that is part of the URL. We definitely want to send the text of the message, and take a look, we don't need to send the participant ID. Actually, we need to put it in the request, but not part of the body of the request. We want to send the current user ID in a header, like we are doing here. So this would mean that we would have to repeat this code here. Let's extract this to a function and use it on both places. First, let's pass in here the payload that we want to send to the server. So we are going to send an object. We are going to send an object that has a property which is text, which is going to be filled in with the text that is available on the payload. We are going to stringify this so that we convert it to JSON. Now we want to return the result of this HTTP post call so that we return an observable of any. Another thing that we want to do at this stage is we want to fill in the third argument of the HTTP post call, which specifies which headers we want to pass in this HTTP post. So let's start our refactoring. Let's define here a function and we are going to call it simply exjar headers. We are going to take these headers that we are defining it here and we are going to extract them and return them as the result of this function. The user ID is going to be the argument that we pass into this function, and we are also going to return this. We are not going to return the headers directly. Instead, we are going to return an object which has a property called headers and a value for that property, which is the headers variable itself. Using the ES6 shorthand object creation notation syntax, we can simply write this as such. Now let's use this function here. Let's call it here in the load user threads method first. So we need to add in the this keyword in order to be able to use this function. And to the function we need to pass in the user ID. We are going to specify it here as a number. So as a general rule, it's a good idea to add type annotations to the input arguments of each function. So now we have here a function that creates the headers that we want to pass in each time to the server. We can now simply call it here in the save new message method. We are going to call the exjar headers function and we are going to pass it in the user ID, which is available in the payload. Now this function might be useful in other services that our application might have, because we really want to pass in this header in every request. So we can rename this function to, for example, common HTTP headers, meaning that these headers are common to all HTTP requests that we do with our application. Another thing that we can do is we can externalize this function here in a separate file, in case that we would like to use this in other services other than the threads service. So let's create here a file and we are going to simply call it common HTTP headers.ts. We are then going to take this function and we are going to move it to the external file. We are going to define this as a function here and we are going to export it so that it's visible outside of the file. If we hit Alt Enter, we are going to import headers from Angular, and this way we will have our function available. Let's now go back to threads service, and if we remove the this keyword, we will be able to import the newly created function. So let's quickly have a look at the import that was generated with Alt-Enter. So now we have the implementation of our save new message method completed. But the problem is, right now, if we would call the server, nothing would happen, because let's have a look at the current implementation of our server. We only have one API for get user threads defined. We don't define what to do with a post request. We only define what to do with the get request to /API/threads. So let's switch to a new branch of our application where we have this method already implemented in the backend. Please remember that at the end of the course you will have a full section where we will be able to see how can we build this type of backends that are very useful for prototyping purposes. So let's quickly switch to the new branch and see the write new message functionality in action. It's coming right up in the next lesson.